guys, welcome back to another episode of In the Barn. I'm Robin.
And I'm Kelsey. And in today's episode, we're going to be discussing two very popular do-it-yourself at-home therapies. We are talking about therapy tape and massage guns. Just how much training do you really need to use one of these tools, and how much can they really help our equine partners, or are they just the latest flashy trend? So we're going to be talking about therapy tape or Caneso tape, Kinesiology tape. I can say it in my head. I cannot say the word out loud. Kinesiology. Kinesiology. Now, every time I say that in the future, I just want you to cut it and paste so that it sounds like I pronounce it correctly every time. So, in case you guys haven't noticed, Christmas was a few months ago, and many of us may have found... No, what I'm trying to say is a lot of people got massage guns for Christmas. They are all over Facebook being used in random ways. Many of us have previously purchased Equi-tape, and maybe some of us got Equi-tape for Christmas, and that's why we're doing this episode now, so that you guys can figure out how to use these pretty shiny things that you got or didn't get and maybe want to get. I don't know. Oh my God, this is harder than it thinks. Transitions are really hard, you guys.
Both in real life and on the horse. Transitions are a challenge for everyone.
Right, because it looks like you're stopping, but really you're not. You're adding energy, and that's what's so hard. Even that, and I mean that verbally as well. You're stopping one thing, but then you have to add energy to this other thing, and it's really hard, okay?
Well, the thing is, there is no stop in a transition. It's moving that energy from one place to the next. Just channeling it in a different way.
Yeah, but you have to get me to stop talking about one thing and start talking about another thing. And that's really hard. So I'm going to go first. I'm going to talk about therapy tape, which goes by a lot of different names, and there's a lot of different brands. But I want to introduce Kinesio tape first, because that is the original tape that was first introduced in 1979 by Dr. Kenzo Case, who was a Japanese, or is a Japanese chiropractor. And he invented this tape back in 1979 to be used for humans originally, and it's now been taken to animals, dogs, goats, giraffes even have been seen to be using this tape.
Really?
In order to help them. Yeah. I saw pictures on the internet, and I did not read why the giraffe had Equi-tape, but it did.
I don't know. I thought it was specific to performance, and I don't know anywhere where they have show giraffes or sport giraffes.
First off, the sport giraffe community is huge. Lots and lots of agility. They have a heck of a time getting through those little circles and the tunnels, but they are great in the pole bending. I'm just kidding. There's no agility giraffes. But I would really like to see an agility giraffe now.
I would love to see Western Games giraffes, or no, even better, Mountain Games giraffes. Can you imagine the rider sliding off the back, running across the stepping stones and trying to vault back on?
Yeah, I feel like they would just vault on and slide right back off. I just feel like there'd be a lot of time, friction issues. You just shoop. So this tape has been used on a range of different athletes, both the human and the animal kind, and we can discuss later if a giraffe is an athlete or not, but they've used them. And I think it actually was on their leg or something for hoof support for a funky leg. Anyways, so this tape was originally used for joint therapy. So there were tapes and bandaging methods that were previously used to support knees in human patients. But the issue with those bandages were they had to be replaced frequently, and they also affected the patient's range of motion. So Dr. Case looked to develop a specific type of tape that could be left on for 5 days and still allow the patient to have a higher range of motion. This tape really took off in 2008, even though it had been invented in 1979. It became really popular in 2008 with the Olympic Games. A lot of things become popular at the Olympic Games because it's such a big audience. It's broadcast on everybody's TV. Everyone wants to be an Olympic athlete, and so anything they do, you want to do. In 2008 is when it really became popular for everyday people to be using, and I know you used TheraTape when you were in cross country.
Yes, I did use it when I was running and was having a lot of knee issues and stuff. And I'll be honest, actually, I never felt a difference with it on my body. I just thought I now fit in with all the other girls that were taped to the nines and looked like Terminator.
Yeah, no, and that's you know, I don't know how to respond to that because I found the research actually really kind of interesting, and we'll get into it.
Okay.
That it really works in some areas and really doesn't work in other areas.
Oh.
But the results are flipped for horses and humans. Horses were good in one area and people were bad. Like it doesn't match. So you really can't take a human study in this case and apply it to horses. And you can't take a horse study and apply it to humans. Like the results have been flipped every time. So it really became popular with horses in 2000. And the FEI does currently allow the tape to be used at competitions. You can't ride in it. You can only have it on in the stable area. So as soon as you go to like the warm-up arena or you leave the barn, the tape has to come off. But if the horse is at the barn, then they can have it on. So the tape, there's a variety of different colors and widths, but all of the tape is cotton and elastic. So it does have the ability to stretch. So you can stretch the tape when you go to apply it. And it is breathable because it's made out of a cotton material. It's breathable, which is good because you're going to be leaving it on the skin for up to 5 days. And we all know what happens when you put a Band-Aid on and you leave it on for a couple hours. Your finger gets really pruny and gross. So you wouldn't want to be doing the same thing with horses. So the cotton tape is really breathable. And if you're like still not sure what therapy tape is, you probably no one does it at your barn, but it's very obvious. It's like bright colors, different patterns. There's a lot of different ways that it can be used, a lot of different applications for it. And all of those applications have like a different type of pattern, whether it's on the legs or it's on a muscle, whether it's like braided or basket weaved or just like a straight line of it on a muscle. There's a lot of different ways to use it. If you are interested in learning a lot more about the taping, I highly recommend Sybil Molly. She put together in 2016 something called Kineso Taping Fundamentals. This is a training manual for those using Kineso tape, which is a specific type of tape. It was the original invention, but the method is specific to that type of tape, which is something I think is really interesting with these tapes is that there are several different brands that sell the tape. So Equi-tape, I think, is probably the most common one. There's also Caneso tape, text tape, which is the like original version that Dr. Case invented. There's Vetkin tape. All of these are manufactured for horses specifically, and all of these have their own certification program that you can go through to be a certified taper. And I think that's interesting that the people who make the product are also the people that certify you, and they all have their own certification process. And I'm not saying like they invented it, like they made the tape, so you want to know how to use their specific product. But I do think it's an interesting sort of dynamic or relationship when they're selling you the product and training you. And I don't know if this is like, if there's a lot of other products that are the same way, or if this is just like, if tape is the only thing I can think of right now.
It's a weird power dynamic.
Right, because the goal, they don't make, and then maybe they probably do make money off the certification programs because they are fairly expensive. But like you make money off the product. And so your certification program would then, I mean, the goal of the certification program is to use the tape as much as possible. And does it encourage the use of tape when it's not practical or shown to have benefits? That's kind of like where I come to, is that you're probably going to be encouraged to use it a lot more than it's necessary.
Yeah, I can see that.
All of these certification programs, as far as I could find, that are offered by the tape companies themselves, are specifically targeted at veterinarians or those who are certified body practitioners or those who have a specific education in equine anatomy. So I do think that is also another interesting point, is that there are, and we run into this with all types of different body workers, that there's a lot of people who have maybe self-certified in a non-traditional course, are not certified through the companies themselves, that are not veterinarians, that have specifically found a program where they could become certified where they didn't need to be a veterinarian. And I think that's something to keep in mind, that these products are being aimed at vets, and that vets are the ones that are supposed to be applying it and selling it. This tape can be used for a range of different things, from, supporting the legs to developing and helping with muscles, rehab, dealing with injuries, bringing a horse back from an injury. There's 1,001 different benefits to this tape. I've kind of broken it into 3 different categories, especially for talking about the research. Makes it a little bit easier to digest and understand. So the 3 categories I'm going to talk about are going to be range of motion, or like really looking at muscle applications where you are applying a simple taping pattern. This is how I've actually used it in the past and probably what you were thinking of. It's a simple taping pattern that is targeting the horse to use their body in a specific way, so like a locomotion study. The second category is injury, swelling or edema. So swelling due to injuries, and the research I'm looking at, it was mostly looking at horses that had swelling due to surgery. And looking at the lymph nodes, that's becoming really, really popular, is getting a better understanding of the horse's lymph node system and how it drains and affects the horse's basically recovery. And then the third category is support, which would be supporting things like joints and tendons, similar to maybe boots being used on the lower legs. I believe there's other support applications that can be used on like the hips and the pelvis region. We'll start it off with the range of motion studies that I found. So this is actually a really interesting application where you are applying a piece of the TheraTape, whatever brand you're using, to a specific muscle or a specific region. And the way it works is it stimulates the horse's sensory pathways. So it makes them feel that tape in that area. We're getting a call from hell. The phone is ringing. So this is really interesting because you apply the tape, and basically what it does is it makes the horse think about that area in which the tape is applied because they can feel it. And those sensory pathways from the location of the tape through the fascia, through the nervous system, connect into the horse's brain, which then sends messages to the horse's, legs to control their pattern of movement. Sort of this circular pathway of trying to get the horse to be more aware of the specific muscle group, the specific area, in order to get them to perform better. This is how I've mentioned I've used the tape. I've used it on Adeline in her neck. She breaks at about like the third vertebra in her neck, but she doesn't break at the pole. She breaks sideways, so she can bend and look great to the left, but to the right, she has this weird kink in her neck. I found success and really liked it when I applied the tape to her neck in order to get her to sort of be more aware of that area. And I don't know if it helped by lifting the fascia off that muscle, if it stimulated the skin. I don't know the whole capacity of what was going on, but I found success with it using it that way. So I found a couple different studies that taped the horses. One taped the back, one taped the horse's abs, and another taped the horse's front legs. And the tape was applied in a very rudimentary, very simple way, either just across the abdomen, down the back, or down the neck and front legs. The goal of each of these studies, and I'll get a little bit more into them in just a second, is to measure the change of stride. So that's really what they were measuring, is how is the horse's stride affected by the placement of this tape, which I get from a scientific standpoint. It's a number, and having a number makes for better science because you can analyze that number. It's seen as more of a constant, but I don't know that that's the best measurement tool for when we're talking about these types of applications. I don't know if stride length is really the best way to determine if an application to the horse's abs lifted the horse's back. I think I have other thoughts on things that could be measured.
Well, I guess it depends on what their goal of using the tape is. So if their goal is to enhance the horse's performance, then I guess stride length would be an indicator of enhanced performance.
But in my mind, I would say it's not necessarily. If your horse already has an appropriate stride length, saying that the hind leg is stepping into the footfall of the front leg, I'm looking then at, I'd be more curious, the rein tension. Did my horse get lighter in the bridle? Can we measure how heavy, how much weight I'm now carrying in my hands? Can we measure motion in other places? And I understand that from my perspective, feel is going to be really important, but feel isn't very measurable. You can't measure feel. My feel is not your feel. So these studies used stride length because it was a measurable tactic.
It was quantifiable.
Exactly. This first one, which is looked at taping the horse's abs, is called the effect of Kinesio tape on flexion extension of the thoracolumbar back in horses, thoracic lumbar. So the aim of this study was to determine if the tape, when applied to the horse's tummy, would get them to lift the back. That was the goal. But in order to determine if the back was lifted, they measured stride length.
Oh, okay. I see. I get what you're saying now. Yeah, I don't know if those would necessarily be linked.
Right. I don't think those would necessarily be linked, and especially if you're doing this, these were all hand-done studies, and by hand, I meant no rider. So these were all horses that were looked at in hand, and I just think there's so much else going on if I'm using tape on my horse's stomach to lift their back, there's going to be, and I'm riding, there's going to be a lot more dynamics going on. So while the question was if the horse would lift their back, what they were really measuring was stride length and extension. And they were looking at, how big of steps forward, basically, the horse was taking. Not up, not like a collection step or anything like that. So they used 8 horses that were aged 5 to 15, and they were German warmbloods, Frisians, and German riding ponies. They analyzed them at the trot. So they trotted in the indoor arena for 30 meters, so basically down the long side, turned around, and came back. All these studies were also only conducted over a 1-day period, so like one trial. Which is, if you're looking at using this tape as part of a rehab program, you're using it more than one time. The horses were taped at basically the 16th and 18th rib, but around the stomach. So very similar to maybe those belly bands that you've seen that you can clip into your saddle pad or into a specific saddle pad. They went in that region of the horse's stomach. Basically what they found was that there was no difference. The horse's stride did not change from the taped condition to the untaped condition at all. However, 3 horses, horse 5, 6, and 8, did show some change in their stride. They did show that their trunk, maybe this affected their trunk stability because they were the youngest horses. So they thought maybe the conclusion was that young horses had more flexibility in their bodies and therefore were able to benefit more from the tape. But again, it was only used one time, 30 meters one way, 30 meters back. It's not much of a test. And again, you're looking at stride length. I don't know that that's a great, I feel like there's more. And they did conclude with their study is that more research needs to be done, and here are some other parameters. And they did address that stride length may not be the best measurement, but that's where we're starting. It's what we have, and it's easy to set up a test. The second study that looked at this this tape as far as range of motion is concerned, put tape down the horse's front legs. This was called the effects of Kinesio taping on the trajectory of the forelimb and muscle activity of the oh, guys, no. Nope, that's as far as I'm going. Reading these words is so hard. No, I'm done. It was published in I don't know where in 2017. Okay, I'm reading the next note, which is, you know how we talk about some scientists being really bad at math? This is copied and pasted, guys. I did not edit it. It says 19 horses and ponies of different breeds and genders were used. 19 horses, 8 mares, 10 geldings, and 3 stallions. That's not 19.
That's 21.
That's 21.
What's 9 plus 10? 21.
What if the person only had 19 fingers and toes? And so they were like, oh, we'll just call it 19. Because that's how they counted. Because 21, 19, those aren't very big numbers. You should have been that's really bad.
Who proofed this study and was like, yep, it's good to go?
I don't know. This was one where it was like a pamphlet and it didn't say where it was published. So these 19, maybe 21 horses were analyzed with a no tape condition and a taped condition. So they were put on treadmills and they were jogged on a treadmill with tape down the front of their bodies or down the front of their forelimbs. So their stride length and arc was measured at walk and trot in both a no tape, with tape, and post tape conditions. What they found in this study was that, again, there was no change. There was no discernible difference in any of these conditions, that the horse's stride lengths did not change while being taped down the front of the legs. And I think the idea of taping the horse down the front of the legs was maybe to see if they could get more knee action out of them. With this study, I do kind of question a treadmill, though, because I feel like a treadmill is designed to have very even strides, and the treadmill really controls that animal's stride length because it's moving. So I don't know how useful that is when we're looking at measuring stride length on a treadmill, but I do know treadmill studies are commonly used to measure stride length. That's just a question I have in general about treadmills. There is an additional study that is the effects of posturally adjusting Kinesio taping method on spinal and stride kinematics and thoroughbreds. Again, these were thoroughbreds whose backs were taped, and again, no significant difference was found between taped and non-taped conditions. So that's kind of the research we have when it comes to stride length and taping, that it doesn't really seem to be connected. And this is that's the simpler tape method that a lot of us can do at home and is the performance enhancing. But going back to my original point, I don't know that stride length is the best method of measuring.
Yeah, it's still up in the air. You don't really have a conclusive answer on that, or like no one really gave you a good response.
No one gave me a great response to that question. I think it does go back to the individual horse and depending on how you're using it, and again, stride length, whether that's the appropriate thing to measure. What I do find really interesting is this study as well as the next one, both at the very end, as they're going through the results, they look at other studies that have been done on taping and what did our results fall in line with those studies, or did they not fall in line with those studies? And this is one of the studies, or one of the areas that kept pointing out that this method of taping works great for humans, but doesn't work for horses. And I think my theory is that I can tell a human, I'm going to tape your knee, you're going to take straight steps and not roll your knee. Or I'm going to tape your ankle and you're not going to roll your ankle. You can have that conversation and they can now know this tape is on my body to make me think about moving in this specific way. You cannot have that conversation with a horse. And I'm thinking that's part of the reason we're seeing better success with this method on people. But that's where it's coming back, is that they're taking people studies, saying it's great for people, it also must work for horses. And I think we run into this with some of these studies and therapies, is that it doesn't work the same on horses. Horses are similar, but not exactly the same. The next method, or next category of using it, is for wounds and swelling. So what this is when your horse has an edema or a hematoma, some type of liquid buildup, you're going to see these really kind of complex, cool looking, squiggly, squid-like taping. Usually there's going to be an anchor somewhere around a lymph node gland, and then it's going to be this sort of braided, sort of squiggly looking tape to help drain that area and to apply compression to that area. So how it works is that when the animal is walking or moving about, that tape provides periodic compression and expansion and allows the vessels to open and close in order to move fluids through that area. And this is a method that they're finding a lot of success with. So a 2017 study published in the Journal of Equine Veterinary Science titled Treatment with Therapeutic Bandages to Control Equine Post-Arthroscopic Tibio-patellofemoral Swelling. So basically what this is looking at the horse's stifle, essentially, and doing joint surgeries on the horse's stifle. They had several horses in this study that received this type of surgery. So 12 horses, they broke them into two different groups, so 6 in the control and 6 in the treatment. They had an operation on their stifle area, and then they received taping. So the first taping was applied an hour after, and then it was observed 12 hours, 24 hours, and 72 hours after the initial treatment. They measured the width of the swelling, and also took its temperature. And what they found was that the horses in the treatment group had much less swelling in the initial 12 hours, and that their swelling peaked at 24 hours and then started to decrease, where the control group, their swelling peaked at 72 hours and then started to decrease. They also found that the horses with the tape had a lower overall temperature of that swollen area. And this is great because a lot of these surgeries require that the animal be able to start moving again in order to start their rehab. And the sooner you can get the horse moving, the sooner you can get them to recover. And swelling is often associated with pain and discomfort in that area and encourages the horse to not move around. So if you could decrease that swelling and decrease the circumference, that's what they were measuring, was the circumference of the swelling, maybe that horse can start moving and start that recovery process sooner.
How did that line up to the human studies? Was there any comparison there?
Yeah, so in this case, this method doesn't work on humans. They have not been finding good success with this method on humans, that it does not do much to control the swelling. The other component, I have another study that also looked at this, is pain. So the question is, does this help reduce pain? So the first study did not look at pain factor. The second study did look at pain factor, and they seemed kind of upset that it didn't help reduce pain. And I'm like, well, what were you expecting? So this second study was published in International Journal of Advances in Medical Science, and it's titled The Effects of Equine EDF Taping on Wound Healing and Edema Control After Surgical Castration in Stallions.
Oh,
yeah, that was kind of and then they've got a picture of what it looked like to have those horses taped, and I was like, yeah, no wonder they were still in pain. You taped their area. What did you think? You thought they were going to be like, thanks so much for the tape? Like, I feel like we could have seen that one coming. But
yeah,
they did not do the lymph node or the specific. So what is really different with the swelling tape is that it is cut into a lot thinner strips, and so it's not a big band of pressure. It's these tiny little bands of pressure that are weaved all across the skin. With this other study that looked at castration in Frisian horses, so they had 10 horses that were castrated, 5 were taped and 5 were not taped. The taped horses just got like a band of tape adjacent to their sheath. It wasn't in a tape method for reducing swelling. They were done by a physiotherapist, but I don't know who that physiotherapist was, what their experience, I don't know more about the taping. The horses were checked at 3 hours, 8 hours, 24, 48, and 72 hours, and at the 7th day. Essentially what they found was the horses that had the tape, even the big band, showed lower skin temperature at 72 hours after surgery and likely less inflammation. They just assumed the horses had less inflammation due to the temperature, because temperature is often an indicator of inflammation. I do agree with that, but their conclusion was that it didn't help decrease pain, and that while it did help decrease swelling and temperature, pain wasn't reduced. So therefore, like, this isn't an adequate method. I think that's fair. We probably shouldn't be taping our fresh geldings junk. It just, I'm sorry, doesn't seem the kindest. That is sort of the research around swelling. There are other studies that looked at swelling, that looked at case studies, and they were all coming back with the same thing, that it really does work, especially post-surgery. This is a good method. This is showing good results in horses. And most of these studies looked at post-surgery because that was like a control versus just an injury. So I think this is one to, if you know your horse is going to have surgery, if you know, maybe your horse does get an injury. The only catch is that it's not super easy for just the general public to do. You do have to have some education, some training. The more training, probably the better, so you can get the tape placed the best way possible.
Okay. Which would line up with who they're trying to sell to, which is vets.
Yeah. And I know they do have training courses you can take. You can't get certified as a regular person, but I, as a regular person, can take training courses in order to get better educated around taping. And I've looked into it. I just haven't been motivated to do it yet. So the last category is support. This is also one that the blogs love to share and talk about. Not this study specifically, but just using tape sort of in place of, like, say, tendon boots or support wraps.
Oh.
It seems weird, but a lot of the success is anecdotal. There's no research to back it up. There's one case study, but it's looking at something totally different. So it's called Correction of Angular Limb Deformities and Foals using Kinesology. We do know that foals with crooked legs or leg deformities, that we can use casts, which are typically pretty rigid, in order to try to help straighten out their legs or reduce deformities. So they had 2 foals that they both had like twisted knees, essentially. And so they used tape they Vetkin tape, and they kind of made like basically crutches for the ponies. So they taped their legs in order to provide support for these foals. And they did this for every 5 days for 15 days. And they found that the legs did start to straighten out. But we kind of already knew this was going to be the case. Now we just know that you can use tape instead of a more stiff crutch or splint in order to address a foal's deformity. That's really it as far as research into support, yet the blogs love to say, tape your horse's legs. This will, provide additional support for them. And I think this is kind of like the boots, that maybe boots provide a little bit of support, but even if they do provide support, do we really want to be affecting the horse's tendons this way? Do we really want to be stopping a horse that is typically a totally normal, functioning, healthy horse? Do we really want to stop their body from functioning correctly? They are supposed to there is supposed to be hyperflexion in their fetlocks. That is part of their design. Do we really want to be interfering with that?
Right. There's issues that come about when you don't let a tendon or a muscle use its full range of motion and you interfere with that, because there's a reason why it's supposed to go that full range.
Exactly. Now, but if you are trying to use the tape, because it's something I've discussed with Addie's vet, do we tape her legs at a certain point? But Adeline has, her fetlocks are dropping. She has a disease. She's not normal. She's not typical. So if taping her legs and providing support that way makes her more comfortable, do it. I'm going to do it. I'm not going to use it as a replacement for an exercise wrap. And I'm very aware that like her legs, our normal horse's legs, are supposed to flex in that way. So I don't know how much restriction we want to put on their legs. That's really the research around Equi-tape. We've got these 3 categories that people have kind of looked into, or not Equi-tape specifically, but Theraguns. It's kind of hit or miss if they work or not. We really seem to understand the swelling seems to be a good thumbs up, but the other 2, there's still a lot of questions around. This was one of those, I was having a hard time finding like studies. I was finding a lot of studies that were like secondary published, like the PDF that was created for the conference the vets went to, or the person with presenting the research went to, like their handouts. So I wasn't finding like the original source, which was a little bit challenging. So this source that I found was a 1-page document. There was very little information on it.
Well, at least you found some information that pertained to horses, because when I was looking into massage gun, there's no research in regards to like massage guns and the Theraguns, the hypervolts, and how they affect a horse's body. It all focuses on humans, which I was thinking about earlier. Like, I guess that's not a bad thing, right? Because a muscle is a muscle, regardless of whose muscle it is, whether it's mine or a horse. But maybe it's not as applicable or interchangeable as I had thought it was when you compare, the Equi-tape, how it affects a horse's body differently than it actually affects the humans.
And I wonder, I think it's well known that a horse's skin is thinner and that they have like a lot more nerve endings than people. And I wonder if that has any play in it, that there's just some of the layers are a little bit different. I did find a study, and we'll use this in another episode, looking at fascia. And has recently been discovered that human fascia and horse fascia are pretty similar. We can apply a lot of the same logic that we do with humans to horses, but that's one layer. There's skin, there's nerves, there's muscles. So yeah, I don't know.
I researched massage guns, and boy, have these made their entrance in an extravagant fashion just into the world. It feels like it was almost overnight. Everyone was talking about these, buying them, receiving them as gifts. Like, everybody's got their own massage gun, whether it's a Theragun, a Hypervolt, a Tim Tam, which, by the way, fantastic name.
Wait, aren't Tim Tams something? Tim Tams are like a cookie.
I think they're also a hypergun, or not a hypergun. They're also a massage gun.
Yeah, they're totally a cookie. They're totally a cookie, Tim Tam.
But there's even like horse-specific massage guns out there, where there's Brandenburg equine percussion gun, there's Equi-release equine fascia massage gun, and they were very specific on their website that it was research proven, which I thought was funny, because there's might have proven something with human research. There's nothing in regards to horses. So I thought that was a funny reference on their website. And then I love how they actually advertise saying research proven, and then they did not provide any research. They didn't even reference what it proved, all they said was research proven. There was nothing else to go along with that statement.
And I think this is something we ran into when we were looking at the blankets, is that research is all human research, and we just cross our fingers and assume it applies the same to horses.
These are advertised to access deep muscle fascia, increase oxygenation, and stimulate blood flow, which would improve circulation. Myofascial release, so think of a foam roller. When you use a foam roller on yourself, the gun kind of has a similar effect, but it allows you to focus on a small muscle area. So where the foam roller is large and you can't really narrow in on one specific location, the massage gun focused down on one specific target area of muscles. They're also advertised to improve range of motion, release tight, sore muscles, and increase power output, whether that's a horse or a person.
Wait, power? I can more volt?
You can jump farther.
Oh!
Power within your body. You don't get electrically charged from it.
I was joking. But it sounds stupid. That's a stupid phrase.
It's a stupid phrase, and it was also proven wrong. So I don't know why they're still advertised to do this. I was looking into all of the different guns and stuff, but there were so many out there that I didn't look into how every single one was developed. So I'll just throw out how Theragun, that brand, was brought about. And it was developed by Jason Worsland, who was a chiropractor himself, and he was trying to help himself recover and rehabilitate after he got into a motorcycle accident. So most of these guns, massage guns, were created with the idea of doing deep tissue massage and assisting in muscle recovery and rehabilitation, which I think is where we've seen most of these being used, is with pro athletes, as well as when they came about on the horse market, you saw a large increase of the upper level competitors all of a sudden using them and saying, I use this in my recovery team, and bam, everybody's got one. And the research, as far as I can tell, there is not one study that looks at massage guns and their impact on the increased range of motion or blood flow and how that affects horses. There's a caveat with this, is that doesn't mean there isn't research on massage work and with horses, because there is. The specific thing I was looking at with these massage guns was that percussion and vibration that comes along with them. Yes, there's some research behind theraplates. That's not quite what these little massage handheld guns are designed for.
Yeah. Those are much different vibrations and tactics.
Yeah, it's very different. It's not a little handheld device that's concentrated in one location that then moves across their body. Very different impacts. I've stood on a theraplate. Trust me, it feels different than using a Theragun on your body. But the first study I'm going to be talking about is actually one that's referenced pretty frequently. It came up over and over again in multiple different articles that I was reading, as well as the one brand that advertised that they had research proven behind their equine massage gun. This was the study they referred back to, and it was published back in 2014, called the Vibration Therapy in Management of Delayed Onset Muscle Soreness, also called DOMS. But essentially, this is just post-workout sore muscles. This is just if you did more exercise than normal, a different exercise than normal, and your muscles are sore. That, like, we're all very familiar with this. That's just what it is. I don't know why they came up with a fancy name for it. But essentially what they were looking at was to see if these handheld massagers made a difference in sore muscles after a workout, and if they could relieve some of that soreness.
I love that they gave it a name so it feels like I have a disease.
I know. I don't know. Delayed onset muscle soreness. And it even has its own acronym, so it's fancy. I struggled hard reading this one. I was having a really hard time comprehending it because they were throwing every word they ever read in the thesaurus at it, and I was like, I don't know. I understand horse anatomy. I don't know what humans are. Like, it was so hard for me to figure out, and it just like was throwing me for a loop the entire time. But what they were trying to figure out was that if the use of vibration therapy applied to the entire body would reduce post-exercise muscle soreness between 24 to 72 hours after that workout. However, I think it's weird that an equestrian company, an equine massage gun brand, referred back to this study, because this study looked at muscle soreness. It wasn't looking at a difference in the range of motion. It wasn't looking at a change in reactivity of a person's muscles. It was looking at the person's muscle soreness. And I feel like muscle soreness is more of a personal thing. Like, I feel like to get a full understanding of how sore that person's muscles are that day, if it's improved or if it hasn't improved, you have to have a verbal conversation with them. And in this instance, you can't have that same conversation with a horse. So if you want to address muscle soreness, I think a better way to prove the research or the benefit of these massagers in terms of horses would be to refer back to the studies that look directly at improved range of motion, like look directly at the reduction of reactivity in the person's muscles, rather than looking at a number that kind of requires a verbal conversation to confirm or deny positive or negative results, if that makes sense.
Right, because, like, yes, our horses can be sore. They can obviously suffer from, like, next day soreness, but they can't explain that it's muscle versus this joint, or that they can't differentiate what it is. They could just say that I'm sore.
But what's even weirder is, like, I fully went into reading this study, and even the way I presented it right now is, you would think this is a study that they conducted, right? But in reality, all they did was pull multiple tests and experiments that range from 2006 to 2012 that look specifically at the use of these massage guns and their effect on soreness after a workout, and drew their conclusions from there.
You know, it's interesting because I wonder if that 2014 literature review was chosen because it is so generic, you can sort of blankly apply it to anything, and that the assumption would be anything would help, therefore these guns would help.
I don't know. And what throws me for a loop is nowhere do they say in this that it's a literature review. I made sure I was looking at the right one. I went back to the different articles and clicked the ones that had available links. Not all of them linked it, so you couldn't actually go read it yourself, but the ones that did link it, it all brought me back to the same one, and we're presenting it not as though it was a literature review. And I don't know, maybe they did their own experiments from 2006 to 2012 and now are compiling all the information and data that they received and the results that they saw into this. Maybe that's where they're getting this from. I don't know. It was very confusing and convoluted to read. And like they had a table that broke down how many participants were in each one of the experiments done in between the 6 years and like what the results were, what treatment was being given to them. So like I think their conclusions that they drew are totally valid and fine. I just don't understand why this is the one everyone's referring to and references.
I think this is the problem we see though with like Horse.com is once one person publishes it, everyone's going to keep using it and reciting it regardless of what it actually says or what it actually is. It's just that first blog, that first media outlet, and then that's going to become the fact, and that's going to become our resource. Even maybe it's appropriate, but maybe it's not appropriate, or maybe it's correct or not correct. I think that's led to so many problems in the horse world is one person says it and everyone goes, and then everyone believes this and you're like, well, wait, hold up.
Exactly.
It doesn't make any sense. It can't be this way. And anyone who wants to counterpoint it, looked at as the crazy one. Because everyone else believes this one little myth, this one little thing.
Right. It's so misleading and so much misinformation. Not necessarily misinformation, but so much information. It's the telephone game where it just gets twisted the more and more it gets passed on the line. But what they found when they were compiling and comparing all the different data they got from these various experiments done from between 2006 to 2012 was that vibration therapy was effective at reducing muscle soreness after a workout. It did increase the range of motion. It did increase blood flow, though oddly enough, they do specify it increased blood flow under the skin, which I thought was interesting and weird to specify because I don't really know anyone that's trying to increase blood flow outside of the skin.
Guess it didn't cut anybody.
I don't know. I thought that was a weird specification, right? Because before that point, it never crossed my mind that we were talking about blood exiting the body. I thought increased blood flow was all internal. And they do, at the end of this study, mention that while it was hypothesized that these massage guns would increase muscle activation and power output, so increased power within those muscles, so like an explosive jump off the ground, neither of these appeared true, which there's actually multiple studies done. There was one done by Alvarado Hernandez in 2020 that was looking at the use of Theraguns on people and seeing if they had a larger increase of power in a vertical jump, and there was nothing there. And there was even another study done, I think in 2017, that looked at people really want it to increase the power output of a person.
Really want you to jump higher with these things.
They really want it. And it's
really important.
And it's still advertised. Like I still see some of these guns that are like, increase your power output, you get stronger. And after like 3 different studies that they all come to the same conclusion of it doesn't increase your power output, you would think they get the hint. But I don't know if they've gotten there yet.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
One of the things I actually got really frustrated with that I didn't expect to have happen going into this, because I figured if you're working with people, right, people are a lot easier to convince to do things for you, and with you can pay them. They understand reward and stuff a lot better than animals do. Most of these studies, they don't look at multiple trials, really. They don't look at the effects of massage guns over a long period of time. Most of them look at like a one and done type of thing where they have 1 5-minute treatment, see if the person's performance improved, and like, did it work, did it not? So they'll have the person perform a certain activity, measure them, take note of what's going on with their body, and then they'll use the Theragun or whatever brand they're using for 5, 10, 15 minutes, and then they'll go and have the person redo whatever exercise they were doing and measure that. And then that's it.
And that's what I found really frustrating with the tape as well, is that these are part of a program. These aren't a standalone application, and then you jump higher. It's, you've got to use it as part of a healthy program.
It was very strange, and I didn't really see many that looked at the rehabilitation, but then again, I could have been completely looking in the wrong area. I found a literature review that was actually pretty comprehensive. They looked across 4 different databases and compiled 19 studies that looked specifically at lower limb mobility and the rehabilitation and the effects of performance enhancement that these guns, or not guns, God, I gotta stop saying that. And one of the studies that they started talking about, and they went pretty in depth in, was one that was done in 2020, and it looked at the effects of a Theragun on the improvement of back flexibility, which once again, this is on people. None of these are on horses. And so their goal was to see if the Theragun would, when it was used on the person's hamstrings and on their lower back, it would increase their flexibility in the sit and reach test. And before they used the gun, the person's flexibility was 3 inches. After being massaged, their flexibility, they were able to reach up to 7 inches. Indicates that they had a significant change in flexibility. The only thing is that I feel like some of the people that were talking about this study and the way they were representing it and discussing it was they were kind of misrepresenting it, in which it was a case study. They only measured one person. It was only one dude that they took his measurements for. There wasn't multiple participants. There was just one dude, which doesn't make his results invalid by any means. It was just felt like those that were talking about this study were completely misrepresenting it, and I didn't understand why when there was another one done in 2014 that looked at 24 participants. Well, it wasn't looking at back flexibility. They were looking at the change in hip flexion and knee flexion. And you had 24 participants. They used a Theragun on their hamstrings and hips for 5 minutes. They found the hip flexion increased by 4 to 6.8 degrees and knee flexion increased by 1 to 2 degrees, where the control group who didn't use a Theragun didn't really see that big of a difference or much change in their flexion range. But it makes sense as to why they're talking about this one case study with one person rather than talking about the study that was done with 24 people. But sorry, anyways, what was your but that you had?
So my follow-up but is a lot of these therapies that we are seeing are the same thing as walking your horse for 15 minutes, 20 minutes. It has the same benefits. Putting a back on track rug on your horse or putting them using a massage gun. You could get a lot of the same benefits from hand walking or loose rein walking. And so when you're looking at these tests, and I understand this was a person doing a stretching test, but had that person jogged for 10, 15 minutes, then came back, would he have had similar results? Are you trying to do this cold and unwarmed up, or are you doing this warmed up? And a lot of these therapies are shortcuts to warming your horse up or spending that time hand walking them, that you could get the same benefits. And that's why a lot of times you're seeing results and measurable results in these experiments, but those results are the same thing as just warming your horse up.
Right. Actually, I mentioned that in my final thoughts part of my notes where, yeah, these are measurable results. Yes, they are clearly showing a difference. No one's comparing it to anything else. And I actually did find a study that compared ischemic compression, which is just putting pressure on a myofascial trigger point for 10 to 20 seconds, and they did it up till 60 seconds until that trigger point releases, as well as using a Theragun for up to 60 seconds on the same trigger points to see if there was a difference in blood flow and flexion. And both of them had an improvement, but they didn't mention in their study if there was a difference between the two methods. They both had an improvement.
Interesting.
So they both work, but there's nothing really saying one method is better than the other. But what they are better than and what they are a good replacement for is that professional massage. And so I think that's where the Theraguns and the other massage guns out there on the market really come in to play and excel, is that they're there to be a massage tool. So they're there to replace the need to call out a professional regularly for those deep tissue massages that you would not be able to do as well as a professional can do. They're not necessarily a complete replacement for that. Obviously, you still need a professional to come out and evaluate your horse's body and their muscles and still do an appropriate massage at times. But these are a great tool to have in your toolbox to use and to be able to have access to deep tissue massaging to provide to your horses without having to constantly spend all the money to call a professional out, if that makes sense.
No, it makes sense. However, I know a lot of professionals aren't wanting you to use these. A lot of professionals are saying that you need to be careful. You can't just randomly go about gunning your horse down. That there's a lot of sensitive tissue. There's a lot of specific areas, a lot of different pressures. How hard are you using it? How you feel it is not the same as how your horse feels it. And so you do need to be careful when using these guns.
Well, that kind of goes with any piece of attacker equipment out there, is that you have to know how to use it to be able to use it, and before you start applying it to your regular routines or start working it in with your own horse. So I actually put together a list of, not very long list, only has 5 things on it, but a few tips and how to actually use these massagers, because so many people now have access to them, whether they own their own one or they just simply have access through their own barn to be able to use one. And the first one is that these handheld massagers, they use vibrations and percussion, which means what you need to do, which means you don't need to be applying your own pressure to it. If you think that applying pressure to it is going to get it to get deeper into the muscle, it actually isn't. It's just going to hurt or be too much pressure. The way you use them is set them to your setting, the appropriate setting for your horse, and rest the massage gun against their body. There's no need to add any additional pressure. And like, of course, you start on the lowest setting and then work your way up from there. And always, always pay attention to your horse's body language. Are they liking it? Are they enjoying it? If your horse is telling you they don't like it in a certain location, then they don't like it in a certain location. And just because they liked it the previous day in that area does not mean they're going to like it tomorrow in that area, because you don't know if they pulled something in their stall getting up. Did they accidentally slip in the pasture? Are they more sensitive in one area than they were the day before?
Well, and I imagine you can overdo it as well. They may really enjoy it in the moment, and then you focus on an area for too long, and then they're like a little sore there the next day.
Oh, yeah. That's actually number 4 on my list of tips and tricks, is that it's recommended when you use one of these massagers that you don't focus on any one muscle group longer than 2 minutes. And as I have one of these, and I personally have used one of these, that it does feel super good in the moment. And for like the first couple minutes, it feels great. But then once you start overworking the muscles, they can kind of become tender and it no longer feels good. And you become more sensitive to it, and it just doesn't feel good anymore. So that's why you only focus for about 2 minutes on one muscle group. You move the gun. I gotta stop saying gun. You move the massager slowly across your horse's muscles, or if you're using it on a person, you move the gun slowly across their muscles. You have to give time for their muscles to adjust the vibrations and the percussion of the massager, and then slowly move it up and down whatever muscle you are focusing on. But at the same time that you're moving it slowly, you don't want to hold the gun static. You don't want to hold it stationary in one location. Max of just holding it in one position, no moving, should probably be about 5 seconds, 5 to 10 seconds, only focusing on one area, and then slowly move it along. And then the last tip that I have, that is probably one of the most important ones, is that these massagers are intended for deep tissue muscle work. They are not meant to be used on bones. They're not meant to be used on joints, tendons, or nerves. So don't go running it across your horse's spine. Be aware that horses have a lot thinner skin than we do. They have a lot more nerve endings than we do. So they are so much more sensitive to these types of devices and massagers. So don't move it across their spine. Don't do it on the bony part of their withers, down their lower legs. Don't do it on their tendons of their legs. You feel like you shouldn't have to say that, but you probably still do have to say it. Don't use it on their throat. Like, be very conscientious of where you're using it on their body and try to only use it on muscles.
Good advice.
And that's pretty much all I got with Theraguns. It was really hard looking at the research out there because it was all so tailored towards humans and how humans improve or don't improve with the use of these, that it was kind of difficult to compare it to our horses. So I looked at the studies that said that they improved muscle soreness after an exercise and kind of took that with a grain of salt. But then those that actually looked at the improvement in range of motion, I would say that's applicable to our horses.
I imagine now that the guns are so popular, there are going to be research studies looking at them in the next year or two.
Oh, I'm sure.
It just the research has to catch up with the demand. And now that they're all over, I'm sure people are now going to start to be like, hey, I wonder if these actually work on horses.
Right. I don't anticipate this being a topic that goes without research behind it for very long, honestly. I think it's probably within the last handful of years that these have come onto the equestrian market. So it's just, while demand for them has skyrocketed, they haven't really needed to back it up yet, because they've been using human studies to justify their claims with the horses. So I'm not faulting any of them, honestly. This is one of those topics that I'm not mad at them for the lack of research behind them. I'm just waiting to see when it catches up.
Well, and it's selling. They don't need to do the research. If you have a product that's not selling, or a product that is so new to the market, you may have to do the research, make the research published, and then sell the product. Where in this case, it's selling. People want it. They don't need to provide that research if you're willing to buy it. Any final thoughts about the at-home therapies?
I do not. Thank you so much for sticking with us through this episode. Sorry we were all over the place. Sometimes you have a rough one. And I think this is one of our rougher ones. But if you have questions, comments, concerns, topics you want us to discuss, you can reach out to us on Instagram at inthebarn.pod, or you can send us an email at inthebarnpod@gmail.com.
And I'm working on a Facebook page. We're going to have a Facebook page shortly.
Oh. Remember to stay safe, stay classy, and stay in the saddle. See you next time.